so glad to see everyone here as we all try to make Boston a better place for African Americans, a more stronger, a more welcoming, and a more vibrant place. So this is what State of Young Black Boston is all about. The first thing I want to do is actually let people see who are the people that made this thing possible. So can all the State of Young Black Boston conference committee members please stand up and wave and let people know who you are. Thank you. A number of people upstairs working very hard to make this thing happen. First thing, where did State of Young Black Boston come from? It started over a year and a half ago here at the Freedom House, where a number of Project Reach Snowden scholars, alumni from the program, came here. Hey, Project Reach? Is everyone here in Project Reach? Please say hello. That's right. We came together here at the Freedom House as a place that we viewed as our home to actually start having a discussion about young Black Bostonians and how we fit in this city. And so what we did is that we brought a group of our friends together here in this building and grant, okay? We talked about everything that were the feelings that we had about being here in Boston. We talked about the good, we talked about the bad, and we talked about different ways and strategies that we all could come together to actually make this a better place. So the first thing that we decided to do is that we decided to form a committee, and those are the people that you see around with the t-shirts and are here actually to give the information to you over the next 2 days. So today we welcome all of you as community builders for the next 2 days to actually reflect, bring your strategies, and also to talk to each other. That's the very main point about this, is for all of us to actually to learn from each other and also meet other people that are feeling the same things. Now the first thing is that, did anyone get the save the date cards? They're all in your chair, and see those in the community. We had 5 questions that really came out of these discussions with all these 30 people, and they're actually there. So if you look at those questions, we said if you can answer 1 out of these 5 questions, you need to be at this conference, okay? Can I see the card? First question was, are you looking for great ways to volunteer time to the community and youth of Dorchester, Roxbury, Mattapan? How many people here do that today? Okay, that's a good group, okay? Number 2, are you trying to find social events, parties, and places to meet people? Now, I know everyone's going to walk right? 3rd, are you looking for an apartment or thinking about buying a house in the city of Boston? Now, looking around the room, that's a lot of hands here. 4, are you looking to find a Black church that meets your needs? And 5, are you 20 to 35 in age and always thinking about relocating to Atlanta, New York, DC, Virginia, all the time? All right. Those were the questions. These are what came up in our discussion. And so we plan for the next 2 days to actually talk about this. The first thing I want to do is actually bring up Gail Snowden, chair of the Freedom House. Gail, first thing is that we want to thank you from the committee, because we made this idea up a year ago, and we came down and sat with you and said, Gail, we have this vision. And the first thing that you did, you said, we're for it, okay? You saw our enthusiasm in the whole process, and you were the first person to actually step up with the Freedom House and actually back us on this. So all the committee members just want to say, thank you, Gail, for being the first person. And Gail, we'd like to have a welcome to Boston to Freedom House.
Thank you very much, Chip. And on behalf of the board of Freedom House, I'm delighted to welcome you all here tonight. This auditorium has seen many such events when we've had a full auditorium over the past 50 years. The one that comes to mind for me, I was probably a sophomore or a junior, now we're talking 30 years ago, at Harvard and Radcliffe. And we decided that we would have a boycott of the Boston schools. And so everyone brought their so that we would have a learning day, and that was the beginning of a lot of changes here in Boston. So Freedom House has been about change. We've had community meetings here in the 60s talking about urban renewal. In the 70s, my mother, Gail Snowden, began to focus on education of young people, and out of that came a number of programs. The Project Reach program, the International High School at Copley, because she was concerned that young people be exposed to global issues, and that school was named after her, the Snowden High School. It always makes me feel really weird when someone says they go to Snowden, because I'm like, really strange. But Freedom House over the past 50 years has always been a place to meet and to discuss issues. And not only to discuss issues, but to find solutions. So I want to congratulate the group of young people that decided a year ago enough complaining was enough, and that they would take a leadership position to do something about it. And really, that to me is one of the most important outcomes of this evening, was that people got together and decided to do something and make a change. When you do that, you get a chance to build skill sets, and we often talk as African Americans or women that our skills are not recognized in our corporations. And one way to build skills and have a safety net is to get involved in leadership events such as this. And then when you go back to tell your manager, I was the leader of such and such, that begins to change their view of who you are. And I would say that for me personally, that made the difference. I don't know how many years ago it was now, about 20 years ago, when Boston Urban Bankers Forum, black bankers getting together, just decided to start, and I decided to run for president. I could then go to Bank Boston and say, I know I'm only an assistant vice president here, but you're not seeing the full totality of who I am. And now, 30 years later, I was just promoted to executive vice president. I learned a lot, and there was an article in last week's Boston Globe that said, although we have a tough time cracking the glass ceiling, usually by the time we've gotten there, we've done everything 200%, so we really know what we're doing. And that's David Thomas, and you've got to get his book and learn more about what he has to say about how we're building our skills as we go along. So this event is going to be wonderful. You're going to have fun. You're going to meet a lot of people. It's going to be about networking, and it's going to be hopefully about some things that will end in change, and it will be a beginning of something here in Boston for young black people and young people of color, so that you won't be thinking about going to Atlanta, D.C. I'm talking to my daughter who wants to go to New York. So there's got to be something here that builds the infrastructure here in Boston, and I'm looking at you to do that. So again, welcome. I also want to do my commercial. This is Freedom House's 50th anniversary year. We're going to kick off a capital campaign. You know, I always have stretch goals. We want to raise $5 million. And we're going to start this with a benefit on August 8th with Natalie Cole. So we will have tickets and we'll be giving you more information. But, you know, it's about reaching back and giving back. And Freedom House needs your help so that we will be viable in the 21st century. So much for my commercial. But welcome on behalf of the Board of Freedom House, our staff. We're delighted to have you here. And thank you so much, Chip.
Okay. How many people have heard this before? Okay? You're from Boston. There are no black people in Boston. I heard that. Okay? Second thing, Boston, how can you live up there? It's so racist. Right? Well, today's session is about having the ammunition to fight back. Okay? Today's session is called Blacks in Boston, Building Community Yesterday and Today. Today we have Anna Faith Jones, President of the Boston Foundation, this city's community foundation, has taken the effort to speak about the rich history which Boston black community does have. She has premiered this presentation at the Partnership last February, and to tell you a little bit about Anna, Her father was the first black president of Howard University. All right? She joined the foundation in 1974, and she was named president in 1985, and she's also another first. She is the first African-American woman to run a major foundation in this whole nation. Under Ms. Jones' leadership, the foundation developed a new discretionary framework called Building Family and Communities. The foundation has endowed over $575 million and makes grants over $32 million to nonprofits in the greater Boston area. Many of you know I work at the Boston Foundation as a program officer. Anna has been a true role model to me, a friend and a mentor, and I thank her for being that. After Ms. Jones' presentation, we will be joined by author and genealogist Frank Dorman, who is the author of 20 Families of Color in Massachusetts. And we also have some books. I can bring the books. It's right here, okay? And also has an endorsement of Bryon Rushing in the back, so it's really good. Bryon Rushing is also here. He is an historian, a notable historian, and also a state representative, which we all do know. Also, we have Joyce Ferriabough, who is also a co-author of Blacks in Boston, and also a political strategist, which many people know as she's worked on many people's campaigns to actually get them to win. So we're glad that all of them are here to help us start off this conference as we build and make Boston a better place. So let's have a warm welcome for all of us. I welcome everybody to the podium. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. I want to add my words of welcome to all of you and thank you for inviting me to join you this evening. I'm pleased to be here. I want also to thank all of you who have done the hard work of putting this conference together and to congratulate you for deciding to begin with a look back at the history of African Americans in Boston. It is a fascinating history and an inspiring one. Before I begin my slides, however, I want to take a few minutes to tell you what I think this history means. Afterwards, our panel of eminent historians will give us their own interpretations. The history of African Americans in Boston is essentially a story of building a community under duress. If there is an essential lesson, it is this: we must build on strengths. Black America, urban Black America in particular, has been disserved by analyses, however well intended, that have defined the community by what it lacks rather than what it possesses, thereby obscuring its strengths and seriously hindering its development. But Black Boston's strengths are manifest to anyone who knows the history of Black people here, to anyone familiar with the remarkable achievements of this community over time. Our African American roots go down deep in Boston. Black people have been here since 1638, just a few years after the Puritans established this city. And Black history here represents a major contribution not only to the history of Black people in America, but to the history of the larger society as well. Let me explain what I mean by that. Black music was once thought of as a sideline of American music, but it has now come to be recognized as part of this essential American sound. Black music has become a major part of the contribution that America has made to the world of music. I believe the history of black people in Boston and across America will one day be regarded in just this way, as fundamental to the contribution that Americans have made to the development of human freedom. I am convinced of this because over the years it has been black Americans who have pushed the limits, tested the meaning, established the definition of American democracy. The early white settlers in America, the English colonists, more or less inherited their freedom. It was the product of a long and gradual emancipation from the old regimes of Europe. But when the American colonists declared their belief that all human beings were equal from birth, it was the black people of this country who put that belief to the test and who eventually forced America to live up to its stated philosophy. In the 1770s in America, white colonists were promulgating this new concept of freedom. Freedom not as something granted by government, but as something God-given and inalienable. And it is then that our story of blacks in Boston begins. It is a story of building community on an ideal of freedom. And one of the earliest tellers of that story was a young woman named Phyllis Wheatley. She had been brought to Boston as a slave from Africa at the age of 7 or 8. She quickly learned English and then began to study Latin. In her early teens, Phyllis traveled to England where she published her first book of poetry and became a celebrity. Back in Boston, she continued her writing and joined the Old South Church, a hotbed of revolutionary radicalism at the time. Her writing began to incorporate some important contemporary ideas. She wrote, for example, quote, "God has placed a love of freedom in every human breast, and we Africans are no different," end quote. Such statements carried immense weight at the time. The colonies were arguing their way to freedom from England on the strength of the late 18th century rhetoric of God-given human rights. And in a similar way, black Bostonians were beginning to argue their way to freedom from slavery by presenting petitions to the legislature that relied heavily on the same rhetoric, the love of freedom now believed to be innate in every human being. Blacks in Massachusetts also began to demand the right to vote. Paul Cuffey, whose name appears third among the signatures on this petition, was a free man with an international shipping business. He was probably the wealthiest black man in America at the time. Cuffey, seen here in silhouette, refused to pay taxes to Massachusetts for the same reason Massachusetts refused to pay taxes to the Crown. With no right to vote because he was black, he argued like the colonists who tossed the tea into Boston Harbor that taxation without representation is tyranny. The struggle for black freedom was further advanced by the participation of African Americans in the Revolutionary War. In fact, the first man to give his life in the cause of American freedom was Crispus Attucks, who was killed in the Boston Massacre of 1770. Many other African Americans, including the young Bard Loon, fought at Lexington and Concord. At the Battle of Bunker Hill, the British commander, Major Pitcairn, was killed by a young black man named Peter Saylor. Slavery was abolished in Massachusetts in the early 1780s, as it was in Vermont around the same time, and in all of the North by 1804. Boston had become the birthplace of freedom, not only for white America, but for black America as well. In the century that followed, the free black community of Boston built its homes on the north slope of Beacon Hill, and there they established a model for community building in black America. The hill was just then being developed, and brick mansions were rising along Mount Vernon Street. Many blacks lived in the more traditional frame houses, like this one on Smith Court, which is still standing today. In 1806, black Bostonians built the African Meeting House. It is the oldest standing black church in America, and an institution that would become central to the community's development. Reverend Thomas Paul, its first minister, stands near the head of a long line of activist black ministers. At a time of intense controversy over whether to force white churches to integrate or to develop a separate black church, Paul urged the development of separate institutions as a way of strengthening the community's bonds. The Meeting House quickly proved its importance, establishing a tradition in which the black church would play a major part in advancing both the local and the national black community. At the Meeting House in 1832, with black supporters, the white abolitionist William Lloyd Garrison established the nation's most important anti-slavery organization, and in the succeeding 3 decades, its pulpit would be graced by every important abolitionist of the day, including Sojourner Truth, Harriet Tubman, and Frederick Douglass. In the early Beacon Hill days, black Bostonians developed a raft of community organizations, social, philanthropic, and artistic. At the lead was Prince Hall, of whom only this fading image survives. A veteran of the Revolutionary War, Hall established the Black Masons in America. It was the first black fraternal organization, and it brought together the leaders of the community, provided help for the poor, and developed a kind of insurance system out of dues paid by members. The Prince Hall Masons survive today in Boston and have spread throughout the world. The black community on Beacon Hill was remarkably adept at providing for its own needs, but it was still a poor community where black laborers were likely to earn about a third of what white laborers earned. Nevertheless, by as early as 1840, the community had the beginnings of a professional class, with lawyers like Robert Morris, who became the first black lawyer in America to try a case before a jury. He won the case, by the way. And John S. Rock, a Renaissance man who was to die at the early age of 41, but who found time to become not only a doctor, but a dentist and a lawyer. Before the middle of the 19th century, the black community on Beacon Hill also produced a new generation of artists, including Edmonia Lewis, and began to amass enough wealth to provide the taste of an elegant life for some of its members. Meanwhile, the struggle for civil rights intensified. Charles Lennox Remond fought for the integration of transportation and succeeded in getting the Massachusetts legislature to outlaw the use of separate cars on trains. Sarah Remond tackled places of public entertainment. She attended a performance at a theater called the Howard Athenaeum and refused to sit in the gallery to which black people were relegated. She was thrown out of the theater, but took her case to court and forced the theater to integrate. William C. Nell also brought suit, this time against the Boston School Committee for segregating the public school system. Nell was an important early black historian who had written about African American participation in the Revolutionary War. He urged black parents to boycott the segregated Smith School on Beacon Hill, and for 11 years campaigned for equal access to education in Boston, finally forcing the Massachusetts legislature in 1855 to outlaw segregated schooling. Black Bostonians in these early years were deeply engaged in the struggle to abolish slavery in the South. Paul Cuffey, the tax protester, believed the answer lay in Africa. He used his own ships to transport black families to the new colonies that had been established there. Other Bostonians denounced this approach and urged resistance and even rebellion. David Walker wrote what was perhaps the most inflammatory call to arms in the entire abolitionist period. Walker's appeal, widely reprinted throughout the country, was banned in the South, where even white people could be arrested